so fucking heavy. Yeah, straight over there, mate.
Hello guys, I'm Super Ron, welcome back to the channel, and we're here again at Autoshack and we're carrying on with a car from a previous episode. This is a stunning 1989 Porsche 911 Carrera 4, and in the previous episode you saw me drop the engine and box out because it was absolutely pouring oil out of every orifice. The gearbox was notchy getting into gear, and there's a few other problems that just needed addressing. So we've done lots of these 911s before and it's always been a dream, except for this one. Because of the four-wheel drive system, it caused me a lot of aggravation. I had to drop the whole rear bumper and rear panel off, be able to move the engine and gearbox far enough back to get it off the torque tube, and it turned into quite a mission. But we got it out, we got the gearbox sent away to a specialist, and that has just returned today. So we've got the car back in to fit the super fresh gearbox. It had all new synchros, new bearings and everything else that it needed inside, and sealed it all back up, so that is a fresh unit ready to go. While we were waiting for the gearbox, I spent a lot of time stripping the engine down, taking all the covers off, fitting all new gaskets, rubbers and seals. Whereas the previous company had reused the old gaskets and siliconed them in, we got a full set of brand new genuine Porsche gaskets and replaced every seal of the lot. So we should be nice and oil tight now. So here's me putting all that back together. Pretty much all back together. Got everything cleaned up. Got all the powder coated parts all cleaned up nice again. So we've got new belts, all new genuine seals on the cam chain covers because they were leaking. Got all new seals on the rocker covers, top and bottom. All new spark plugs. We've got the new power steering belt on. We're just about ready and complete. The inlets have come out absolutely perfect. They look like they're brand new, but they were just put in ultrasonic cleaner and they've come out very nice. I've spent a bit of time cleaning up all the other panels and everything that we've got to go back on, and all the metalwork I've just given a little satin black, so that's going to look nice and special, the little frame that goes around it all, so we can get all this back together. And just before I put the rear cover on, which will cover up the crank pulley, I'm going to put the new clutch on as well. So we've got that and all new bolts, so we'll get that in. And all back together. Looking amazing. I'm so glad I spent the time just to matte black all the metal parts, because that's just finished it off nicely. Got all the covers on all the way around, clutches on, with of course a Super On signature. Exhaust is all back on, so now we're ready for the gearbox. So we are going to go on a little bit of a tangent. Before we put this gearbox back in, we noticed the front diff is leaking quite badly. We've spoken to the customer and he's agreed it seems silly to go this far on the back end when we don't do the front as well. So we're going to drop the diff out and get new seals put in that. It does look a little bit awkward, it's wrapped around the steering rack, so we might have to drop the rack down a little bit, but hopefully it won't be too bad, and then we can get all this back in together. You can see it's really oily around the output seals, so we'll get that done now. I didn't feel much of that coming out, but here is all the front wheel drive stuff. And I think this put up nearly as much of a battle as what it was to get the rear end out. There's not a lot of room up there. The diff sits on top of that little subframe, which also mounts to the rack, but the power steering lines go over the top of that, so you can't drop that out separately. Then the track rods actually pass through the solid subframe there, so you can't get them out without getting the track rods out. And they couldn't get the track rods out because there wasn't enough room in there with the steering at the angle. But now we are out. So we are at the stage of being a completely bare shell at the moment. No mechanicals at all. So we're going to get the diff sent away to have the bearings done and the seals redone. But in the meantime, we can get the rear end all back together. Well, you can see someone's been here before and they obviously weren't too confident in their seal, because this is full of clear silicone sealer all the way around there. So let's get it done properly. And while the whole drivetrain is out, it's a good opportunity to see how massive it is. So the engine is solid mounted in its cradle. There's the clutch super on. And then the gearbox is huge, and that mounts directly to the engine. Then you've got all this in front of the gearbox as well. So the bell housing mounts over the clutch there, solid. Then the torque tube mounts directly to the gearbox, goes on that spline shaft. That runs all the way through the middle. And the diff is solid mounted to the torque tube, and that's got a spline shaft. And then there's just rubber mounts right at the back, and then one right at the front, and that's all that holds all this together in the car. And that's the gearbox all back on. The clutch release bearing has got all new needle rollers in, so we're all together and ready to go. And because it's such a complete unit, there's not really that much to put back on once it's in. So we've got the engine bay still full of all the stuff, got the drive shafts tied up, the clutch lines are still all connected, so we won't have to bleed anything up. All the bits for the diff locks are still all connected there, ready to go back in. So it's now a case of getting this up into the hole. And we are all back in. The good thing about these Porsches, they're so simple, everything's pre-built, so it all goes in as one. All bolted in, all torqued up, so now it's just a case of connecting everything up. Drive shafts, oil lines, fuel lines, a few plugs, and we'll be up and running. So we can get the exhaust on, get all the rear bumper, get everything all built up, ready for when the diff comes back and to complete. And it is all back looking like a car again. Got the bumper on, all the exhaust, everything underneath is now all bolted together and looking much cleaner than when it came out. So I've still got this CV to go on because we're awaiting for a boot because that one's split. But this side is all on, clutch was all on, all the mounts are in, anti-roll bars back in, all the brackets. I said full exhaust system, all back on. Looking much better. It's so much easier without the torque tube in there, which used to be in this great big hole here. It meant just like a rear wheel drive one, I could just slide the gearbox in and didn't have to get caught up on all the front half. So when the diff gets back, we shall return and put it all together. And quick as a flash, we've got the diff back again. We took it to Last Transmissions that also did the gearbox, and he managed to inspect it all and the bearings were fine. There was just a bit of end plate in the shafts, so he could shim the bearings, and now we are all good as new. He gave it a clean, all brand new seals, so we are good to put this back on the torque tube and get it in. Diff all back on the torque tube, ready to go in. But before I get that, I want to get this ready. This is the front subframe, and we had a little bit of snappage on the way out. One of the big bolts snapped, but luckily, looking at it on the other side, it's actually a little steel insert that comes out. So we should be able to tap that out and then be able to get that out from the other side. And then we can put it all together. And it's out. Came out quite easy. Just needed a little bit of heat. So now we can get all this together. We've got some new boots for the steering rack and some new anti-roll bar links. And we can get this front end back on. And time for a little update. I think we are mechanically just about there. We've got everything in. There's just as much of a nightmare to get the front end back in as it was to take it out. We've got a nice rebuilt diff in there. We've got everything on, everything's marked, torqued up. We've got our new anti-roll bar drop links, all genuine Porsche stuff. All the subframes all torqued up. Torque tubes all back on. Everything is ready to go. I filled the diff up. That uses the same oil as the gearbox, which is handy, so we had plenty to fill that up. Going back, power steering's all reconnected. Gear linkage is back on, diff locks are all back on. But it was an absolute nightmare getting this torque tube back on. I thought it was going to be easier doing it the other way around, but it wasn't. It took 3 of us pretty much an hour, shuffling, moving, adjusting, but we are back in 4-wheel drive again. You saw I got the other CV boot on, a genuine Porsche CV boot. That's all on and torqued up. So everything is back together. We have got a 4-wheel drive Porsche again. All my little bags are getting emptier and emptier. So torque tube, slave cylinders, subframe, torque tube, rack. And just to make my life a bit easier, I always just draw little notes, little reminders, smaller nuts for rack if we've got the same one. So all we've got left is front diff cover, offside front splash guard, prop cover and gearbox cover. So it's just all the cosmetic covers underneath. But we have just had one delivery. We sent the wheels away to Wheelworks to get them done, and they've just arrived back. So they are looking amazing. So now I can get these back on. And last little job before we fill it with oil, we've got new washers for the unions here that were leaking a bit. So we'll get them back together and they'll replace the bits of silicone that I pulled out. Let's get this back on properly. So we are oiled up, we've got our engine oil full, put 11 litres in, got a power steering all topped up to max, got the new Porsche fuel filter down the back there. You saw I just had to change the fittings over for some reason, they were different on this filter. So I think we're ready to connect the battery up, just check for any fuel leaks when that primes, and then put the air filter back in. and go for a start. I think we are all ticked off. Okay, first start. Let's give it a try. Right, let's check all our levels. Power steering's been all sucked away. It's alive. So I've had it all running for a good half an hour now, and we are way up to temperature. The cooling fan's been in and out on the oil cooler. And although there was a lot of smoke coming out of here to start with, like it was before, that's just all the residue still in the exhaust, in the heat exchanger. Once that's all burnt off, we'll be good to go, because there's no new oil going in. You can see they're still coming out of the seams of the heat exchangers, just because they're getting so hot and the oil's thinning right out. But the engine itself is all completely dry. All the cam seals we did at the end, the rocker covers, nice and dry. So now I think we can put all the covers back on. Power steering's all bled up and working and up to level. So we've got under trays, wheels, and we can get it back down on the floor. So that's all the under trays back on, all the extra 964 aerodynamics that they added. Got all the vents back on for the oil cooler, the little NASCAR style vents, to the new diff that you can see just shiny in there, cooling the CVs. The flat floor torsion cover, then we've got the gearbox cover, another little vent going to the transfer box. And then I mentioned when I took it apart, we've got these extra ones, which looks like there should be another cover that goes along here. So we mentioned it to the customer, and he's brought down the pièce de résistance to finish it off. This has got a full under tray for underneath the back half as well. So we spoke to Porsche, got the full fitting kit for it. So let's get that back on and get this full flat floor back together. Right, so let's take this out for a little test drive, because as we know with these classic Porsches, you have to take them out for a full run and then check the oil when it's all warm and up to temperature. So we've got great oil pressure, so that's a good start. So we'll just wait for the temperature to get up and then we can check the oil properly. I spend most of the time seeing all the cars we have in the workshop, and once you get them outside, the colours really do pop out. It is a real red. So I didn't film too much of getting the gearbox back in. It took 3 of us, all hands on deck. We just put the cameras down and got all the front diff and torque tube all back in. This is really feeling really nice. Pulls strong in every gear. So I think we can take it back to the workshop and get this all finished off. And back in the workshop, all cleaned up and all finished. Test drive went really well. Selects all the gears really nicely. Drives fantastic, looks great on the new powder coated wheels. And I'm super happy with the engine bay, considering how grotty and oily it was before. Now it looks like it should. Everything's up and connected and working. So my work here is done. And so that is going to wrap this episode up. This one's ready to go back to the customer to enjoy a leak-free lifestyle in his Porsche. So what we've learned from this, a 964 is so much more complicated than the earlier SCs, and the 4-wheel drive system makes it even more complicated. There's so many more components, so many more technical bits to get around, but we've made it. So we've done all the seals and all the gaskets in the engine, so we've got no more leaks there. The gearbox has been fully rebuilt, so it selects gears perfectly now. Before, it's really hard to get into first, and now it's like a brand new gearbox. And the front diff has all been adjusted up and it's got its new seals, so there'll be no more leaking at the front, and the oil cooler's sealed as well, so all its fluids can stay inside the car. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Make sure you give it a like and be sure to tune in for the next Autoshack episode, because there's no telling what we could have in next. A classic rare car like this, a modern car, who knows? But until next time, make sure you have fun.